Chapter 1. The offer. John Thomas preferred mornings before the world woke up enough to need anything from him. The lake at the edge of the neighborhood still carried a layer of mist, soft and gray like breath on cold glass. It was a quiet hour. The only sounds were the shifting creak of his small aluminum boat against the dock and the occasional distant call of a bird that had no interest in people or their problems. John appreciated that. He moved with quiet efficiency, placing a tackle box near the center seat, testing the line on his rod, and setting a small cooler beneath the bench. Everything had its place. Everything made sense. No small talk required. He was reaching for the bucket of worms when a small voice broke into the stillness behind him. "What are you doing?" John didn't jump, but he did sigh softly. Not irritated, just surprised that the world had found him already. He turned to see the boy from next door standing barefoot in the dew-wet grass, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and holding something that might have once been a toy truck missing its wheels. The kid looked about 5, maybe 6 if you were generous with guessing. "Loading my boat," John answered simply. The boy tilted his head, studying the process like it might be a complicated machine. "For what?" John hesitated, then replied, "Fishing." The word had immediate effect. The boy's face lit up, briefly, before something in it dimmed again just as quickly. "Oh." John noticed the shift. He wasn't particularly skilled at reading emotions, but that one was hard to miss. "What's with the oh?" he asked. The boy shuffled one foot against the grass. "I have to go to my grandma's today." That didn't sound tragic on its own, so John said nothing. "She snores after lunch," the boy added with quiet seriousness, as if delivering devastating news. John let out a short laugh before he could stop himself. "That's your complaint?" The boy did not smile. "It's really loud," he insisted. There was a pause. John leaned back slightly against the side of the boat, folding his arms. "Well," he said, "a lot of people snore. Comes with age." The boy scuffed the ground again. "It makes it hard to watch cartoons." Now that, John thought, was a practical problem. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eric." "I'm John." Eric nodded like that confirmed something important. John studied him for a moment, noticing the absence of another adult nearby. "Where's your dad?" he asked, mostly out of habit. The change in the boy was immediate. His shoulders dropped just slightly, and his gaze shifted downward, focused on that broken toy truck in his hands. "I never met him." The simplicity of it hit harder than anything complicated could have. Something tightened in John's chest, sharp and unexpected. He looked out over the still water, but he wasn't seeing it anymore. Instead, he saw flashes of his own childhood. His father's steady hands tying a knot, his grandfather's gruff voice correcting him, both of them teaching lessons that had nothing to do with fishing and everything to do with becoming a man who could stand on his own feet. Eric had none of that. John exhaled slowly, then made a decision before he could talk himself out of it. "Hey," he said, "go get your mom real quick." Eric looked up, startled. "Why?" "I've got an idea," John replied. There was a beat of hesitation. Then Eric turned and took off toward his house, bare feet slapping lightly against the walkway. John rubbed the back of his neck as he waited, already questioning his impulse. He wasn't someone who inserted himself into other people's lives. In fact, he made a fairly deliberate effort not to. But there was something about the look on that kid's face. A few minutes later, Eric came running back, with a woman following behind him. Sherry Jackson walked with the slight tension of someone who wasn't sure what situation she was stepping into. She had her hair pulled back in a loose tie, a few strands escaping around her face, and she wore jeans and a simple shirt that looked more practical than styled. Eric pointed triumphantly. "That's him." John straightened, giving a brief nod. "Morning," he said. "I'm John Thomas. Sorry, I should have introduced myself sooner." Sherry studied him carefully. "We only moved in a few months ago." "Yeah," John replied. "I tend to keep to myself." There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just cautious. "I hope everything's okay," she said. "It is," John assured her. "I was just heading out to the lake, and your son and I started talking." Eric nodded vigorously as if to confirm the legitimacy of the interaction. "I told him I was going fishing," John continued, glancing briefly at Eric, "and he doesn't sound too thrilled about his plans for the day." Sherry smiled faintly. "Grandma's house isn't exactly an adventure." "No offense to grandmas," John said. "None taken," she replied. John hesitated for a fraction of a second, then went on. "I was thinking, if it's all right with you, I could take him along. I'll be out until mid-afternoon. Show him how to fish. Keep him busy." The reaction was instant. Eric practically bounced in place, but Sherry didn't answer right away. "That's a very kind," she said slowly. "But I don't really—" "I get it," John interrupted gently. He gave a small shrug. "Look, I'm not trying to kidnap him. And if I did, you already know where I live." The line landed exactly as he intended. Not as a joke, not quite as reassurance, but something simple and honest enough to disarm suspicion. Sherry paused, caught somewhere between surprise and amusement. "That's one way to make a case," she said. "I'm just being practical." Eric looked between them. "Can I go?" Sherry exhaled softly, eyeing John again. this time differently. There was no pushiness in him, no expectation, just a quiet steadiness. How much do you need for lunch? She asked. John waved the idea away immediately. We're going to catch lunch, scale lunch, cook lunch, and eat lunch. All for the price of a container of worms. Eric gasped like he'd just been offered front row seats to magic. Pretty good deal, John added. So no money. But I will need your number. In case something comes up. She hesitated only for a moment before reciting it. John repeated it back once, committing it to memory. Sherry looked at Eric, then back at John. I don't know why, she admitted quietly. But I trust you. John met her gaze, steady and calm. I won't give you a reason not to. And just like that, something unspoken settled between them. A quiet agreement, fragile but real. Eric didn't wait for anything more. He raced toward the boat like the day had already begun. John watched him go, then glanced back at Sherry. I'll have him back by 4, he said. She nodded. Have fun, she called after her son. And as John stepped into the boat and pushed off from the dock, he realized this wasn't going to be the quiet morning he'd planned. But for the first time in a long while, he found he didn't mind at all. Chapter 2, First Cast. The motor hummed low as John guided the boat away from the dock, the shoreline slowly pulling back like it was unwilling to let go. Eric sat at the front, legs swinging over the bench, his eyes wide and fixed on everything at once. The water, the sky, the slow movement of the boat through the lake. This is fast, Eric declared. John glanced at the speedometer and smirked faintly. This is barely moving. Eric turned, disbelieving. No way. You want to go faster? John asked. Eric nodded enthusiastically, gripping the edge of the boat as if preparing for liftoff. John pushed the throttle forward just a little more. The engine deepened in tone, and the boat picked up speed, skimming slightly higher over the surface. The breeze kicked up and brushed against their faces. Eric laughed, loud, unfiltered, completely unconcerned with anything but the moment. John felt something shift again inside him, something lighter this time. He hadn't expected the kid's excitement to be contagious. After a few minutes, John eased back on the throttle and guided the boat toward a quieter stretch of water near a cluster of reeds. This is where we're stopping, he said. Why here? Eric asked, peering into the water like he might see fish waving back at him. Because fish like hiding places, John explained. Shade, cover, makes them feel safe. Eric considered that seriously. So we're tricking them? John raised an eyebrow. We're outsmarting them. Oh, Eric said approvingly. That sounds better. John killed the engine, and silence settled over them again, broken only by faint ripples against the boat and distant sounds from across the lake. All right, John said, reaching for the rods. First lesson. Eric leaned in immediately. This is a fishing rod, John said, holding it up. I know that, Eric said, a little too quickly. John smirked. Good. Then you're already halfway there. He handed Eric a smaller rod he kept for spare use. You ever used one before? Eric shook his head. All right, John said. That just means I get to teach you the right way. He opened the container of worms, and Eric recoiled slightly. They're moving. They're supposed to, John said casually. Do we have to touch them? Yes. Eric looked deeply conflicted. John crouched beside him. Listen, fishing requires 2 things, patience and doing things you don't feel like doing at first. Eric squinted. That sounds like homework. Yeah, John said. Except this ends with food you can eat. That seemed to tip the scale. Okay, Eric said reluctantly. John showed him how to hook the worm, working slowly and deliberately. Like this, he said. You don't just stab it once, you thread it a little so it stays on. Eric watched carefully, his earlier hesitation replaced by intense focus. Your turn. Eric took a deep breath and picked up a worm like it might explode. He winced the entire time but managed to follow John's instructions. There, he said triumphantly, holding up the rod. John nodded approvingly. Not bad. Really? Really? Eric grinned. Now, John continued, casting. He demonstrated first, smooth motion, line arcing out over the water before landing with a soft splash. You try. Eric mimicked the motion, but the line shot sideways and landed a few feet from the boat. That counts, John said. It does. It absolutely does. Eric beamed like he'd just accomplished something monumental. They settled into their seats, rods angled out over the water. What do we do now? Eric asked. We wait. For how long? John shrugged. As long as it takes. Eric frowned. That's not a real answer. It's the only one fishing gives you. Eric leaned back, clearly unimpressed with that concept. A few seconds passed. This is boring, he announced. John chuckled. You just started. I thought it would be faster. That's why most people don't stick with it, John said. They don't like waiting. Eric kicked his legs lightly against the bench. What if no fish come? Then we try again another time. And if they still don't come? John glanced at him. Then we keep trying until they do. Eric mulled that over. That sounds like a lot of trying. Yeah, John said. That's kind of how most things work. They sat in silence for a bit longer. So, Eric said eventually, when did you learn all this? When I was about your age. Who taught you? John didn't answer right away. He looked out over the water again, watching the faint ripple of his fishing line. My dad, he said finally, and my grandfather. Were they good at it? They were patient, John said. That's what mattered. Eric nodded slowly, absorbing the answer. I think I'm being patient, he said. You've been here 3 minutes. That's a long time. John laughed under his breath. For you, maybe. And then, suddenly, the tip of Eric's rod jerked. Both of them froze. Did you see that? Eric whispered, eyes wide. I did, John said calmly. Now don't yank it. Just wait a second. It's moving again, Eric said, panic creeping into his voice. That's good, John replied. That means something's interested. What do I do? Now you lift the rod steady. Not too hard. Eric pulled back, and the line went taut. I got something, he shouted. Keep the rod up, John instructed. Reel slowly. Eric cranked the reel with all the focus he could muster, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Is it big? He asked. Feels like it. It's really fighting. That means it doesn't want to come with you. I don't blame it, Eric muttered. John laughed. Keep reeling. The fish broke the surface briefly, flashing silver in the sunlight. Eric gasped. I see it. Almost there. With one final pull, John reached down and lifted the fish into the boat. It flopped briefly before settling. Eric stared at it like he'd just performed a miracle. I caught that, he said slowly. You did. With my hands. And a rod. And a worm. Team effort, John said. Eric looked up at him, eyes shining. That was the coolest thing ever. John felt something settle quietly in his chest. Something steady. Something right. First catch, he said. You never forget it. Eric crouched beside the fish, studying it like a scientist. What happens now? He asked. Now, John said. We thank it. Eric blinked. Thank it. For feeding us, John explained. Eric considered that, then nodded solemnly. Thank you, fish, he said. John gave a small approving nod. Then Eric looked back up. Can we catch another one? John smiled faintly, picking up his own rod. That's the idea. And for the first time in years, hours slipped by without John noticing them. Measured not in silence, but in laughter, small victories, and the steady rhythm of something unexpected taking root. Chapter 3, Shoreline Conversations. By the time the boat eased back toward the dock, the sun had climbed high enough to warm the wooden planks beneath it. The quiet of the morning had long given way to the sounds of weekend life, distant lawn mowers, a dog barking somewhere down the street, and the occasional hum of a car passing by. Eric stood at the front of the boat like a seasoned captain returning from a long voyage. We caught 3 fish, he announced to no one in particular. 2.5, John corrected mildly, securing the rope to the dock. The small one counts, Eric shot back. John glanced at him. It was smaller than your hand. It still had a face, Eric insisted. John gave a short, conceding nod. Fair argument. Eric beamed as if he'd just won something official. John stepped onto the dock first, steadying the boat as Eric carefully climbed out. There was a noticeable difference in the way the boy moved now. Less hesitant, more certain, like the hours on the water had quietly rearranged something inside him. You're carrying the cooler? John asked. Eric puffed up slightly. I can do it. John handed it over without comment. Eric lifted it with both hands, arms trembling just a little under the weight, but he didn't complain. He just walked forward, jaw set with determination. John watched him for a moment, then grabbed the rods and followed. Sherry was already outside when they approached. She stood near the edge of her yard, arms loosely crossed. Her expression caught somewhere between anticipation and relief. The moment she saw Eric's face, flushed with sun and triumph, something softened in her posture. Mom! Eric shouted before he was even halfway up the walkway. We caught fish. I can tell, she said, smiling as she stepped forward. You look like you've conquered the ocean. I basically did, Eric confirmed. John stopped a respectful distance behind them, setting the rods against the side of the house. He did well, he said. Better than most first-timers. Eric turned immediately. You said I was already halfway when I knew what the rod was. John raised an eyebrow. I said that, didn't I? That means I started winning early. That's one way to look at it, John replied. Sherry laughed. A quiet, genuine sound that caught John off guard more than it should have. Thank you, she said, turning her attention to him. Really? It wasn't a big deal, John said. It was to him, she replied. Eric nodded emphatically. It was the best day ever. Sherry glanced down at him, brushing a strand of hair away from his face. I can see that. There was a pause, not awkward but full, like something meaningful had happened, and no one was quite rushing to move past it yet. So, she said finally, looking back at John. Did he listen? John considered the question carefully. Eventually, he said. I listened the whole time, Eric argued. You argued the whole time, John corrected. That counts as listening. Sherry shook her head lightly. That sounds about right. Eric set the cooler down near the steps and popped it open, revealing their catch with theatrical flair. See? He said. Proof. Sherry leaned in, inspecting the fish with a mixture of curiosity and mild apprehension. They look. She paused, searching for the right word. Real. They are, John said. I know that, she replied quickly, glancing up at him. There was a flicker of humor in her eyes now, something that hadn't been there earlier that morning. I just mean, she continued, I've never actually had a reason to think about where fish come from beyond a grocery store. That's fair, John said. Eric crouched beside the cooler again. We thanked them before we kept them. Sherry blinked. You what? It's important, Eric said seriously. John shrugged slightly. Respect for what you take. Sherry looked at him, something thoughtful settling across her expression. That's a good thing to learn, she said. John didn't respond to that. He just nodded once. Eric suddenly stood back up. Can we cook them now? Sherry hesitated. I wouldn't even know how to start. John glanced between them, then toward his own house. I can handle that part, he said. Sherry's eyebrows lifted slightly. You don't have to. I know, John said simply. But I offered lunch. Seems like I should follow through. Eric pumped his fists. Yes. Sherry exhaled a small laugh, clearly outnumbered. All right, she said. But I'm helping. You can supervise, John replied. That sounds suspiciously like you don't trust me with a knife. I don't know you well enough to trust you with a fish yet, he said. She smiled despite herself. Fair. Eric grabbed the cooler again, this time with renewed energy. I'll bring it, he declared. John stepped aside, gesturing toward his house. Kitchen's through there. Eric didn't wait. He raced ahead, already narrating his own version of events under his breath. Sherry lingered for a moment, her pace slower as she fell into step beside John. You didn't have to do any of this, she said quietly. He shrugged. I know. They walked a few steps in silence. He hasn't stopped talking about it since you left, she added. I've never seen him like that. John glanced ahead, where Eric had already reached the door and was struggling to open it while balancing the cooler. He's a good kid, John said. Sherry looked at him, studying the way he said it, simple, certain, without hesitation. He doesn't usually open up to people that fast, she said. John pushed the door open for Eric, who immediately disappeared into the house. Kids don't overthink things, he said. They just decide if they like someone or not. And he decided he likes you, she said. Seems that way. She hesitated, then asked, Do you? John paused mid-step, the question catching him slightly off guard. Do I what? Like him, she clarified. John considered the question, his gaze drifting toward the kitchen where Eric was already setting the cooler down with exaggerated care. Yeah, he said finally. I do. Sherry's expression softened again, but this time there was something deeper beneath it, something warmer, more personal. Good, she said quietly. They stepped inside together. For a moment, the space felt different, not just John's house anymore, but something shared, even if temporarily. Eric's voice filled the room as he recounted every detail of the day, each version slightly more dramatic than the last. And then it pulled the line like this, he demonstrated wildly, nearly knocking into a chair. And I didn't even get scared. You looked a little scared, John said, moving toward the sink. I was surprised, Eric corrected. That's not how I remember it. Sherry leaned against the counter, watching the exchange with quiet amusement. I think this might be the most entertaining lunch I've ever been part of, she said. John picked up a knife, rinsing it under the tap. Give it time, he replied. We haven't even started cooking yet. Eric climbed onto a chair, resting his chin on the counter. I want to do it again, he said. John glanced at him. Fishing? Eric nodded. John looked at Sherry for a brief moment, not requesting permission, just acknowledging the reality of the question. Sherry met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them again. We'll see, she said to Eric. It wasn't a no. And somehow that felt like the start of something none of them had fully planned, but none of them seemed eager to stop. Chapter 4. Unexpected Traditions. By the third Saturday, it stopped feeling like an exception. It started with a knock, quick, uneven, and unmistakably Eric, and John didn't even pretend he hadn't been expecting it. He opened the door before the second knock could land. I'm ready, Eric announced, already halfway inside. I can see that, John replied, glancing down at the oversized backpack dragging against the floor behind him. Planning to move in? It's supplies, Eric said seriously. For what? In case we're out there for a long time. John crouched slightly and unzipped the bag without asking. Inside were a juice box, a small plastic dinosaur, 2 mismatched socks, and what appeared to be half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. He looked back up at Eric. You expecting the fish to unionize and delay the process? Eric frowned. You never know. John gave a quiet huff of amusement and zipped the bag again. All right, he said. But you carry it. I will. You said that about the cooler last time. I carried it. You dragged it halfway up the yard. That still counts. John straightened, grabbing his keys from the counter. We'll call it determined effort. From the doorway, Sherry's voice cut in. He packed that himself, she said, leaning lightly against the frame. John glanced over, offering a small nod. I can tell. She stepped inside, her gaze flicking from Eric's bag to John's already organized gear. You always this prepared? She asked. I plan enough so I don't have to think about things later, John replied. That sounds like a very specific type of control. It's efficient, he corrected. She smiled faintly. Is that what you call it? Eric, already halfway to the door again, turned back. Are we going or not? John pointed toward the exit. Lead the way, Captain. Eric didn't need to be told twice. This time, the rhythm came easier. There was no hesitation when Eric stepped into the boat. No wide-eyed uncertainty, just confidence shaped by memory. He took his usual spot at the front without prompting, setting his backpack beside him like it belonged there. You remember what to do? John asked as he started the engine. Eric nodded. Hold on when we go fast. Good, John said. You learned something after all. I learn lots of things, Eric replied. We'll test that claim. The boat skimmed across the lake, faster this time, and Eric leaned into it instead of bracing against it. The wind caught his laugh again, carrying it across the water. John didn't say anything, but he did notice. They reached the same cluster of reeds, though John angled them slightly differently. Why not the exact same spot? Eric asked. Fish move, John said. You adjust. Eric nodded, filing it away like another rule in a growing list. Okay, he said. That makes sense. John cut the engine, letting the quiet return. It felt less like solitude now and more like space. Room for conversation, for thought, for something in between. Eric didn't wait for instruction this time. He grabbed his rod, opened the worm container with only minimal hesitation, and got to work. John watched him for a second before speaking. You're improving. Eric looked up briefly. I told you. That's still under review. It shouldn't be. John smirked but didn't argue. They cast their lines, this time with fewer misfires. Eric's cast landed closer to where it was supposed to. That was better, John said. I know, Eric replied. There was a pause. Then Eric leaned back slightly. My mom said I can come again next week. John kept his eyes on the water. Yeah. She said if I keep being responsible. John glanced at the backpack. Mixed results so far. I brought snacks. You brought half a sandwich that's been through something traumatic. Eric looked genuinely confused. It's fine. John shook his head slightly. We'll stick to fish. Eric grinned. Can my mom come? He asked suddenly. John's grip on his rod tightened just faintly, subtle enough that Eric didn't notice. If she wants, John said. She said maybe. Then maybe, John replied. Eric accepted that answer easily. I think she likes you, he added, almost as an afterthought. John blinked once, then very deliberately kept his expression neutral. She doesn't know me, he said. She talks about you, Eric countered. What does she say? Eric thought for a moment. That you're quiet and weird, but not bad weird. John let out a short breath. That's reassuring. And that you're nice, Eric added quickly. She said that too. John didn't respond right away. The line in his hand twitched slightly, but he ignored it. Your mom seems careful, he said instead. She is, Eric said. She always checks stuff. That's her job. Eric nodded. But she didn't check you that much, he said. This time John did look at him. No, Eric shook his head. She just decided. John looked back at the water, something thoughtful settling over him. Sometimes, he said slowly, people make decisions based on things they can't explain. Eric frowned slightly. Like guessing? Not exactly, John replied. More like trusting something without needing proof. Eric tilted his head. That sounds risky. It can be. Was it risky with me coming with you? John considered the question, then shook his head. No, he said. That one felt simple. Eric smiled at that. Good, he said. The rod jerked suddenly in his hands. I got one, he shouted. Focus, John said, already shifting closer. Same as last time, steady. Eric followed instructions more smoothly now, his movements less frantic, more controlled. I'm doing it, he said through clenched concentration. You are. The fish surfaced quicker this time. Smaller than the last but still enough to send a ripple of excitement through Eric's entire body. It's not as big, he said, almost apologetically. A catch is a catch, John replied. Eric nodded, satisfied. They released that one, a lesson John introduced without ceremony. Why'd we let it go? Eric asked. Too small to keep, John said. Better to let it grow. Eric watched the fish disappear beneath the water. That's kind of nice, he said. John shrugged. It's practical. It's both, Eric insisted. John didn't argue. They stayed longer than planned. Not because the fishing demanded it, but because neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. At one point, Eric rummaged through his bag and pulled out the dinosaur. "Look," he said, holding it up. "He can watch." John glanced at it. "Think he's learning anything?" Eric considered that seriously. "Yeah, but he can't hold the rod." Major limitation. Very. There was an ease now, something built quietly through repetition without either of them naming it. When they finally turned the boat back toward shore, the sun had already begun its slow shift downward. "Same time next week?" Eric asked. John didn't answer immediately. He looked out over the water, then toward the distant line of houses where one, in particular, now felt less like just another place on the block. "If your mom says yes," he said. Eric grinned. "She will." John gave a small nod, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely sure whether that certainty comforted him or unsettled him. Because routines were safe. Traditions, though, those implied something lasting. And John Thomas wasn't used to anything that stayed. Chapter 5, Storm Warning. The absence was louder than any knock Eric had ever made. Saturday morning came with the same soft light through the windows, the same quiet air that usually hinted at something waiting to begin. But this time, nothing happened. John noticed it immediately. No uneven footsteps on the walkway. No hurried knock at the door. No muffled voice declaring readiness before sunrise. He stood in his kitchen longer than necessary, staring at the coffee in his hand after it had already gone cold. His fishing rods were still leaned neatly near the door, untouched since the night before. He hadn't packed, hadn't checked his gear, hadn't done anything, really, because he'd known. Not yesterday, not even clearly the day before, but something in him had pulled back earlier in the week, slow and quiet, like a tide slipping away before anyone noticed the shoreline shifting. He told himself it didn't matter. People had plans. Things changed. That was normal. Still, the silence held. Across the fence line, Sherry stood at her kitchen sink, watching Eric try, and fail, to hide his disappointment. He poked at his cereal like it had personally let him down. "He's probably just busy," she said gently. Eric looked up. "He's not busy on Saturdays." Sherry didn't respond right away. That was the problem with routines. They built expectations without asking permission first. "He didn't say we weren't going," Eric continued, voice smaller now. "He just didn't say anything." Sherry pressed her lips together. She hadn't heard from John either. No knock, no explanation, no casual mention the day before. Just nothing. "I'm sure there's a reason," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was reassuring anymore. Eric pushed his bowl away, untouched. "I don't want to go to Grandma's," he muttered. Sherry sighed quietly. "We're not going today." That got his attention. "We're not. Not today," she repeated. Eric's eyes flicked toward the window. "Then maybe he'll come later," he said. Sherry followed his gaze, though she knew exactly what he expected to see, and what wasn't there. "Maybe," she said, but the word sat uneasy between them. John told himself he'd go out later. Maybe mid-morning. Maybe afternoon. There was no schedule anymore, so the timing didn't matter. That was the point, he reminded himself. No expectations. No obligations. Simple. Except nothing about it felt simple. He stepped outside eventually, more out of restlessness than purpose. The air was warmer than usual, a subtle heaviness settling over the day. Storm weather. He recognized it immediately, the kind that didn't announce itself with sudden rain, but built slowly, pressure rising, clouds thickening, something inevitable forming just out of sight. John leaned against the railing of his porch, arms crossed, eyes drifting toward the neighboring yard. He told himself not to look too long. He did anyway, and there they were. Eric sat on the steps, elbows on his knees, his usual energy dimmed into something quieter. Sherry stood nearby, speaking softly to him, though John couldn't hear the words. The sight landed harder than he expected. He pushed off the railing. He could go over, explain, say something. But what? That he didn't come because things had started to feel permanent? That he didn't trust himself not to step into something he wouldn't be able to walk away from? That somewhere between teaching a kid to fish and hearing a woman laugh in his kitchen, things had shifted beyond what he'd planned for? John exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. No, he didn't owe them explanations. This didn't need to be something. That was the rule. Keep things simple. Keep things contained. He turned to go back inside. "Hey!" The voice stopped him. John turned slowly. Sherry stood at the edge of the property line now, her arms no longer crossed but hanging at her sides, her posture calm but deliberate. "You heading out today?" she asked. There was no accusation in her tone. That somehow made it worse. "Later," John replied. She nodded once. "Missed you this morning." The statement landed plainly, no edge, no hidden hooks, just truth. John shifted his weight slightly. "Had some things to handle," he said. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Sherry studied him for a moment. "Eric's been waiting," she said. John glanced toward the steps, where Eric now watched them carefully, his expression guarded in a way it hadn't been before. I figured he'd be disappointed, John said. That's one word for it. Another pause settled between them. The air felt heavier now, the kind that pressed against your chest without asking. You could have told us, Sherry said softly. There it was. Not anger, not frustration, just something simpler and sharper. You're right, John admitted. She blinked, not expecting that so quickly. I know things don't have to be scheduled, she went on, choosing her words carefully. But consistency matters, especially to him. John nodded, his gaze dropping briefly. I know. Do you? The question wasn't aggressive. It was quiet, honest. John looked back up. I grew up with it, he said. Consistency, structure, knowing what to expect. Then you understand why it matters. I do, he said. So why pull back? The directness of it caught him off guard. He could have deflected, changed the subject, given a half answer. Instead, he hesitated, because the real answer was too simple. It's getting complicated, he said finally. Sherry's eyebrows knit slightly. Fishing? John almost smiled, but it didn't quite reach. No, he said. Everything around it. She took that in, her expression shifting. Not closed off, not hurt, but thoughtful. You mean us? It wasn't a question. John didn't respond right away, which was answer enough. Sherry exhaled slowly. We're not asking for anything complicated, she said. He likes spending time with you. I do too. John's gaze flickered at that, but he said nothing. That's it, she added. That's how it starts, John replied quietly. She tilted her head slightly. How what starts? Expectations, he said. Routines. Things that turn into something else. Sherry crossed her arms again. But this time it wasn't defensive. It was grounding. And that's a problem? For me, John said. Why? He hesitated again, the answer sitting heavy in his chest. Because I'm not good at staying, he said. The words came out before he could reshape them. Sherry's expression softened. Not with pity, but with understanding that ran deeper than surface-level sympathy. That's not the same as not being able to, she said. It is if you leave before it gets there. A faint rumble sounded in the distance. Low, quiet thunder barely rolling across the sky. Neither of them acknowledged it, but it hung there, fitting too well to ignore. Sherry glanced back toward Eric, who still watched from the steps. He doesn't need perfect, she said. He just needs someone who shows up. John followed her gaze. Eric didn't look away this time. He held John's eyes for a moment. Hope still there, but dimmer now, cautious. Something tightened in John's chest again. Familiar, uncomfortable. I didn't mean to let him down, he said. I know, Sherry replied. Another rumble of thunder, closer now. The sky had shifted without announcement. Clouds pulling in thicker, darker. Storm weather just like he'd felt earlier. John took a slow breath. I'll take him next week, he said. It sounded like a solution, like something neat and contained. Sherry studied him, her expression unreadable for a moment. That's not really the point, she said. John didn't respond, because he knew she was right, and knowing it didn't make it easier to fix. The first drop of rain hit the ground between them, soft, almost unnoticeable. Then another. Eric stood slowly from the steps, watching as the light drizzle began to fall. John glanced at him, then back at Sherry. I should go, he said. She nodded once. Yeah, she said quietly. No anger, no reassurance, just space. John turned and walked back toward his house as the rain picked up, each step feeling heavier than it should have. Behind him, across the yard, Eric remained standing in the rain, a moment longer before Sherry gently called him inside. The door closed softly, and the quiet that followed wasn't peaceful anymore. Chapter 6, Deep Waters. The next week didn't arrive gently. For John, it came like something he had to walk into, step by step, without the option of turning around once he decided to move. He spent most of Friday evening doing things he didn't need to do, rechecking lines that were already secure, cleaning equipment that hadn't gotten dirty, organizing his tackle box twice in 2 different ways, neither of which actually improved anything. It wasn't about fishing. He knew that, and for once, he didn't pretend otherwise. Saturday morning came with clearer skies than the week before. The storm had passed, leaving everything behind it sharper, cleaner, but also more exposed. John stood at his door before opening it, his hand resting on the handle longer than necessary. When he finally pulled it open, he wasn't surprised to see Eric there. But the energy was different. The boy wasn't bouncing, wasn't halfway into the house before being invited. He stood still, backpack on, eyes searching John's face like he was waiting for confirmation of something that shouldn't have needed confirming. You coming? Eric asked. It wasn't excitement. It was a question. Yes, John said. The answer came steady, without hesitation. And something in Eric shifted immediately, not fully back to the unguarded enthusiasm from before, but closer. Okay, he said. He stepped inside. This time, Sherry followed more slowly. She stood just outside the doorway at first, her gaze meeting John's for only a moment before flicking away again. Morning, she said. Morning, John replied. There was a pause. I almost told him we weren't going, she added. John didn't look away from her now. Why didn't you? Because I wanted to see if you'd show up. There was no accusation in it. Just clarity. John nodded once. Fair. Eric looked between them, sensing something just out of reach. Are we still going? He asked again. John grabbed his keys. We're going. The boat ride was quieter at first. Not uncomfortable, just measured. Eric still held on when the speed picked up, still watched the water with interest, but he didn't narrate every second the way he had before. John noticed. He slowed the boat sooner than usual, cutting the engine before they reached their usual spot. The drift carried them the last few feet. Eric glanced at him. Why'd we stop early? Just felt like it, John said. Eric studied him briefly, then nodded. Okay. They set up in silence, both of them falling into familiar motions. The rhythm was still there. It hadn't been lost, but it felt thinner, like it needed reinforcement. Eric cast his line. It landed clean. Good cast, John said. Eric looked at him, searching for something in his tone. Thanks, he replied. A few moments passed. Then Eric spoke, quieter than usual. Were you really busy last week? John didn't answer right away. He watched the water, the slight tug of his line as it shifted with the current. No, he said finally. Eric blinked. No, John repeated. Eric frowned slightly. Then why didn't you come? There it was. Simple. Direct. No room to hide behind anything complicated. John exhaled slowly. Because I thought maybe I shouldn't, he said. Eric looked confused. Why? John leaned back slightly, resting his arms against his knees. Because sometimes I make things harder than they need to be. Eric considered that. Like when I overpack snacks? John almost smiled. Yeah, like that. Eric seemed to accept the comparison. I don't think fishing is hard, he said. It's not, John replied. But the other parts can be. Eric tilted his head. What other parts? John hesitated. How do you explain fear to someone who hasn't learned to name it yet? How people fit into your life, he said instead. Eric squinted slightly. I'm already in your life. The statement landed clean and undeniable. John looked at him. Yeah, he said quietly. You are. Then why would you stop? Eric asked. John opened his mouth to answer, but stopped, because he didn't have one that made sense. Not to a 5-year-old. Not even to himself if he was being honest. I don't know, he admitted. Eric leaned back, processing that. That's kind of weird, he said. That's fair, John replied. They sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't fragile. It was something being worked through. After a few moments, Eric spoke again. My mom said people leave when they're scared sometimes. John glanced at him, surprised. She said that? He asked. Eric nodded. Not about you. Just, in general. John looked back at the water. She's not wrong, he said. Are you scared? Eric asked. The question came without judgment. Just curiosity. John considered it. Yes, he said. Eric didn't react immediately. What are you scared of? He asked. John let out a quiet breath. That I'll mess things up, he said. Or that I won't be able to keep showing up the way I should. Eric frowned slightly, thinking hard. You showed up today, he said. I did. That's good. John nodded. It is. Eric looked at him a moment longer, then seemed to reach a conclusion. Then you just have to keep doing that, he said. John huffed out a quiet laugh. You make it sound simple. It is simple, Eric insisted. You just don't forget. John shook his head slightly, but there was no argument in it. Maybe I overthink things, he admitted. You definitely do, Eric said. John actually laughed this time, full and unguarded. Yeah, he said. I probably do. Later, when the sun settled higher and the quiet stretched comfortably between them, the sound of footsteps on the dock reached them. John glanced up to see Sherry standing there. She shaded her eyes with one hand, scanning the water until her gaze landed on them. You mind company? She called. John met her eyes across the distance. No, he said, loud enough to carry. We've got room. Eric perked up immediately. Mom, he shouted. We already caught one. Sherry smiled faintly, stepping carefully into the boat once John guided it closer. She moved cautiously at first, her balance adjusting, but there was less hesitation in her now compared to the first day they met. You weren't kidding about space, she said. It's not luxury, John replied. I didn't expect luxury, she said, settling onto the bench beside Eric. She glanced at John briefly. But I did expect you to show up today. John held her gaze this time. I almost didn't, he admitted. I know, she said. There was no softness in it, but no anger either. Just understanding. Eric asked you some questions? She added. John nodded. He tends to do that. Sherry smiled slightly. He gets that from me. I believe it. A quiet settled over them. 3 people sharing space that felt less uncertain now. Not fixed, not defined, but real. Sherry dipped her fingers briefly into the water, watching the ripples spread. You don't have to figure everything out at once, she said without looking at him. John watched her hand in the water, then the way the ripples faded outward. I know, he said, but you do have to decide if you're going to be here, she added. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up his rod, recast his line with practiced ease, and let it settle into the water. Then he looked at both of them, Eric, who was already watching his line with renewed energy, and Sherry, who sat quietly but steadily beside him. I'm here, he said. This time, it didn't sound like a temporary answer. And for the first time since the storm, it felt like something had steadied beneath the surface, something deeper than routine and stronger than hesitation. Chapter 7, The Big Catch. By the time the next Saturday arrived, John no longer stood hesitating at his door. He was already outside. The boat was loaded. The rods were set. The cooler was packed, not just with the usual supplies, but with something extra this time. Intention. He didn't overanalyze that part. Not anymore. He had made a choice. And for once, he was letting that be enough. Eric came running as he always had, but the difference now was back in his stride. The cautious edge from the previous week had softened, replaced again by energy that didn't second-guess itself. I brought better snacks, he announced breathlessly, dropping his bag at John's feet. John raised an eyebrow. That's a bold claim. No old sandwiches, Eric said proudly. Already an improvement. Sherry followed a few steps behind, her pace steady, her expression calm but observant. You're leaving early, she noted. Planning something, John replied. Eric immediately lit up. What kind of something? You'll see, John said. Eric tried to press for more, but John didn't give anything away. That alone told Sherry this wasn't just another trip. She didn't ask questions. The lake was quieter than usual that morning, as if it knew something deliberate was about to happen. John steered the boat past their usual spot without slowing. Eric noticed instantly. Hey, he said, twisting around. We passed it. I know, John replied. Are the fish not there anymore? They're still there, John said. We're just going somewhere better. Eric's eyes widened. There's better. Depends on how you look at it. Sherry leaned slightly toward John. You're being mysterious on purpose, aren't you? Only a little. That's new. I'm trying new things. She glanced at him, catching the quiet sincerity beneath the light tone. I noticed, she said. When John finally slowed the boat, it was near a stretch of shoreline farther out than they'd gone before. The water was deeper here, darker, less disturbed by casual traffic. Eric stood carefully looking around. This looks different. It is, John said. Is it harder here? A little. Eric grinned. Good. John nodded once, satisfied. They set up without rushing, the rhythm of their movements now familiar in a way that didn't need explanation. Even Sherry moved more comfortably on the boat, steadying herself without hesitation, her attention flicking between the two of them. What's the plan? She asked. John baited his hook before answering. Let him figure it out. Eric perked up immediately. I get to decide? John handed him the smaller net. You get to try. Eric straightened like he'd just been given something official. I can do that, he said. The first hour passed with steady effort. Not effortless, but steady. Eric cast with more control than ever before, adjusting his angle when the line drifted wrong, correcting small mistakes without needing to be told every time. John watched without hovering. That's better, he said occasionally. Not constant praise. Not excessive correction. Just enough. Sherry leaned back slightly, watching both of them. You're different today, she said quietly to John. He didn't look at her immediately. How? Present, she said. John considered that. Yeah, he said. That's the goal. She nodded, accepting it without pressing further. Then it happened. The pull was stronger this time, sharper, more insistent. Eric felt it immediately. Whoa, this one's big, he shouted, gripping the rod tighter. John was already moving, his voice steady. Keep it up. Don't panic. I'm not panicking, Eric said, clearly panicking. Then stop yelling. I'm excited. That's allowed, John conceded. Just don't lose focus. The line pulled hard, the rod bending more than Eric had seen before. What do I do? He asked, breath quick. Same as always, John said. Just more careful. Eric nodded, jaw tightening as he worked the reel. It's really fighting, he said. That means it's worth catching. Sherry leaned forward slightly, her attention locked on the scene. Should I do something? She asked. John shook his head. Just watch. Eric adjusted his grip, pulling back, then reeling in slow, controlled turns. Minutes stretched, not long but long enough to feel earned. Then the fish broke the surface, bigger than anything they'd caught before. Eric's eyes went wide. That's huge. Steady, John reminded him. You're almost there. With one final pull, John reached down with the net, guiding the fish up and into the boat. It landed with a solid thud, water splashing lightly against the sides. For a moment, everything stilled. Eric stared at it, then at his hands, then back at the fish. I did that, he said, voice quieter now. You did, John confirmed. With just doing it right. John gave a small nod. That's usually how it works. Eric laughed, half disbelief, half pride. That's the biggest one ever. Today it is. Eric crouched beside it. The same awe as the first catch still there, but matured, fuller somehow. Sherry reached out, lightly resting her hand on his shoulder. That's incredible, she said. Eric looked up at her. Did you see it? I saw everything. He turned back to John. I didn't mess it up. John shook his head. No, he said. You didn't. The moment lingered. Not rushed. Not overplayed. Just held. Then Eric looked between them. We should thank it, he said. John smiled faintly. We should. Eric did it without prompting. Thank you, fish, he said seriously. Sherry didn't laugh this time. Neither did John. Later, when the excitement settled into something quieter, the three of them sat together, the boat gently rocking beneath them. Eric leaned back, tired in the best possible way. His earlier intensity softened into contentment. This was the best one, he said. John glanced at him. Better than the first day? Eric thought about it. The first one was cool, he said. But this one, I knew how to do it. John nodded. That makes a difference. Eric yawned, stretching out slightly. Sherry watched him, then looked at John. You planned this, she said. He didn't deny it. Yeah. Why? John rested his hands on his knees, looking out at the water. Because I wanted to show him something, he said. What? That getting better at something takes time, John replied. And showing up. Sherry studied him for a moment. That sounds like it's about more than fishing. John glanced at her, then back at Eric. It is, he said. A quiet passed between them. Then Sherry spoke again, softer now. You're doing a good job, she said. John let out a small breath. I'm trying. That counts. Eric shifted slightly, clearly listening even though his eyes were half closed. You didn't leave this time, he muttered. John looked down at him. No, he said. I told you it was simple, Eric added sleepily. John smiled, genuine, unguarded. You did, he admitted. As the boat turned back toward shore, the afternoon light stretched long across the water, soft and steady. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt uncertain. For the first time, John wasn't measuring how long something would last. He wasn't calculating exit points or building quiet distance in advance. He was just there. And when the dock came into view, Eric sat up suddenly. Next week? He asked immediately. John didn't hesitate this time. Next week, he said. Sherry looked at him. Not surprised, not questioning. Just seeing him clearly. And this time, when their eyes held, nothing interrupted it. Not timing. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty. Just the quiet understanding that something had already begun. And neither of them was pretending otherwise anymore. Chapter 8, Home Harbor. The following Saturday didn't begin with a knock. It began with a door already open. John stood just inside the frame, one hand resting against it, as if he'd removed even the smallest barrier before it could exist. The morning air slipped in quietly, carrying the same calm it always had. But this time, the calm didn't feel like distance. It felt like space shared, expected. Eric arrived right on cue, though he slowed slightly when he saw John already waiting. You were just there, he said, like that itself required explanation. John nodded. Figured I'd save you the effort. Eric thought about that, then decided it was acceptable. Okay, he said. I brought snacks again. John glanced down at the bag. Better or worse than last time? Better, Eric said with confidence. We'll see. Sherry walked up behind him, her pace easy now, unguarded in a way that had taken weeks to settle into place. You're setting a precedent, she said, looking at John. Open door, no knocking. John leaned lightly against the frame. I think we're past formalities, he replied. Her gaze held his for a second longer than necessary, not questioning, just acknowledging the shift. Maybe we are, she said. They didn't rush the morning. The boat ride was smoother now, not because the water had changed, but because everything else had. Eric still talked, still pointed out things that hadn't changed at all. That bird's still here. That dock looks the same. But there was less urgency behind it. He didn't need to fill space anymore. It was already full. Sherry sat closer this time, her shoulder just brushing John's once when the boat shifted slightly. Neither of them moved away. It lingered there, quiet but unmistakable. They fished, as they always did, not chasing big catches this time, not measuring success in size or number. Just fishing. Eric caught one early and declared the day already a success. That's it, he said confidently. We win. John raised an eyebrow. That's a low bar. It's a smart bar, Eric corrected. Sherry laughed softly beside them. I think I agree with him, she said. Winning early means less pressure. John glanced at her. You strike me as someone who doesn't like pressure. Only the unnecessary kind, she replied. And what counts as unnecessary? She tilted her head slightly. Things that make you forget why you started something in the first place. John considered that. Fishing didn't start that way, he said. No, she agreed. It didn't. They weren't just talking about fishing anymore. Not really. Later, when the sun dipped into that warm afternoon glow, Eric stretched out along the bench, resting his head against his backpack. I'm not even tired, he said, clearly tired. John smirked faintly. You don't have to admit it. I'm just resting my eyes, Eric insisted. Sure you are. Within minutes, he was asleep. His breathing evened out, his face relaxed in that way only kids managed. Completely unguarded, completely certain that wherever they were was safe enough to let go. Sherry reached over quietly, adjusting the strap of his bag so it cushioned his head better. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It held something steady. You didn't run this time, Sherry said softly. John leaned back slightly, his gaze on the water. No, he said. She studied him, not searching, just observing. What changed? John thought about that longer than he expected to. Not because he didn't know, but because the answer felt bigger when said out loud. I stopped trying to keep things temporary, he said finally. Sherry's expression didn't shift much, but something in her eyes did. That's not easy for you, she said. No, John admitted. Why now? He let out a slow breath, looking toward Eric for a brief moment before returning his gaze to the horizon. Because I realized I already stayed, he said. The words settled between them, not heavy, not dramatic, just true. Sherry leaned back slightly, letting that sink in. You did, she said quietly. Another pause. Then John turned slightly toward her. I'm not good at saying things the right way, he said. Or, at the right time. She smiled faintly. I've noticed, but I don't want to keep pretending this is just something I do on Saturdays, he added. Her gaze held his now steady. Then what is it? John hesitated, but only briefly. It's something I want, he said. All of it. Her breath caught just slightly, not enough to show on the surface but enough for him to notice. You mean, she started. I mean this, he said simply. You, Eric, the whole thing. Sherry let that hang in the air for a moment, letting it settle into something real before responding. You're sure? She asked. It wasn't doubt. It was care. John didn't rush the answer. Yeah, he said. For the first time in a long time, I am. Sherry held his gaze a moment longer, searching, not for flaws, but for truth. And she found it. Good, she said softly. That was it. No big declaration. No dramatic shift. Just something quiet locking into place. Eric stirred then, blinking awake slowly. Are we back? He asked groggily. Not yet, John said. Eric sat up, rubbing his eyes, then looked between them. You look weird, he said. John raised an eyebrow. Define weird. Like, quiet weird, Eric said. Not normal weird. Sherry laughed lightly, shaking her head. I think we're just having a conversation, she said. About what? Eric asked. John glanced at him. About keeping things going, he said. Eric perked up immediately. Like fishing? Yeah, John said. Like fishing. Eric considered that. Good, he said firmly. Because I was going to say you're my fishing partner forever. John let out a quiet laugh. Forever's a long time. Eric shrugged. I'm okay with that. John looked at him for a moment. Really looked. Then he nodded. Yeah, he said. Me too. When they returned to the dock, nothing felt like it had to end there. That was new. No quiet countdown in John's head. No instinct to step back or create distance. Just the sense that this, whatever it had become, continued beyond the water. Eric hopped out first, turning immediately. Same time next week? He asked. John stepped onto the dock, offering a hand to Sherry as she stepped out. He didn't let go right away. Same time, he said. Eric grinned, already halfway toward the house. I'm bringing even better snacks. That's a risk, John called after him. I can do it. Sherry shook her head, smiling. I'll believe that when I see it. John glanced at her, their hands still lightly connected. You staying for dinner? He asked. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't careful. It was simple. Sherry met his gaze, something warm and certain settling behind her eyes. Yeah, she said. She didn't hesitate either. And as they walked back together, following the energy of a small boy already planning next week, the space between them no longer felt like something to navigate. It felt like something they'd already crossed. And somewhere along the way, without forcing it, without naming it too early or holding it back too long, they had arrived. Not at an ending, but at something that finally felt like home. Epilogue. Still water. The applause lingered long after the last name was called. It scattered across the stadium in waves. Families cheering too loudly, friends shouting names that had already been spoken. The echo of pride rolling over years of effort finally reaching something real. Caps flew, voices rose, and for a brief moment, the world felt wide and open again. Eric stood on the field, diploma in hand, looking slightly stunned by it all. He wasn't the loudest voice, never had been, but the quiet smile resting at the corner of his mouth carried the weight of something earned, Something steady. Something that didn't need to be announced to exist. From the stands, John watched him with his arms crossed loosely, doing his best not to look as proud as he felt. He was failing at that. Beside him, Sherry dabbed at the corner of her eyes with a tissue she'd already used twice. "You're making it worse," she muttered, though her lips curved upward. "I didn't do anything," John said, his voice low. "You have that look," she insisted. "What look?" "The one where you pretend you're not about to say something sentimental and then you do anyway." John exhaled slowly, eyes still on Eric as the graduates began to gather toward the exit. "I'm not saying anything," he replied. Sherry glanced at him sideways. "Liar." The crowd shifted, gathering into small clusters as people searched for each other. Voices overlapping, laughter breaking through the noise. The weight of endings blending with the excitement of beginnings. Eric spotted them before they called out. He didn't hesitate. He made his way through the crowd with purpose, weaving past strangers until he reached them, and then he stopped, just for a moment as if taking it in. The three of them. John's posture steady as ever. Sherry's smile, already soft with emotion. The quiet, familiar space between them that had never entirely gone away. "Hey," Eric said. Sherry stepped forward first, pulling him into a hug without waiting. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice tight. Eric laughed softly into her shoulder. "You've said that 6 times already." "I'm allowed," she replied, pulling back but keeping a hand on his arm like she wasn't quite ready to let go. John took a step closer, offering a nod instead of a hug. Eric looked at him for a second, then closed the distance himself. John stiffened for only half a second before returning it, one hand coming up to tap Eric lightly on the back in that same steady way he always had. "Good work," John said. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Eric pulled back with a small grin. "That's it?" he asked. John raised an eyebrow. "What were you expecting?" "I don't know," Eric said. "Something big." "You graduated college," John replied. "The big part already happened." Eric shook his head, but he laughed. "Yeah," he said. "I guess it did." They moved off to the side where the crowd thinned slightly, the noise settling into something easier to exist within. For a few moments they just stood there, not rushing, not filling the silence, just being there, together, like they had been so many times before, just in a different setting now. Eric looked down at the diploma in his hands, then back up at them. "I was thinking about something," he said. Sherry tilted her head slightly. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," John added. Eric smiled faintly, then sobered. "About when I was little," he continued. Neither of them spoke. "I remember that first day," he said. "At the lake." John didn't move, but his expression softened, just slightly. "You told Mom you weren't trying to kidnap me," Eric added. Sherry laughed under her breath. "That was memorable." "It worked," John said simply. "It did," Eric agreed. There was a pause. Then Eric shifted his weight, his voice quieter now. Not uncertain, just intentional. "I didn't know it at the time," he said. "But that day kind of changed everything." Sherry's hand found his arm again, grounding in the smallest way. John said nothing. Eric looked directly at him now. "You didn't have to do any of that," he said. John frowned slightly. "Fishing?" "All of it," Eric said. "Showing up, teaching me stuff, staying." John's gaze dropped briefly, then came back up. "That's what people do," he said. "Not always," Eric replied. The truth of it sat between them. Not heavy, just real. Eric took a slow breath. "I used to wonder what it would have been like to have a dad," he said. Sherry's grip on his arm tightened just slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "And then," he shrugged a little, like he wasn't sure how to say it without overcomplicating it. "I stopped wondering." John's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes did. Eric held his gaze. "Because I already had one," he said. The words were simple, but they landed with the kind of weight that settled deeper than anything loud ever could. John didn't respond immediately. For once, he didn't reach for something practical or measured. He just looked at him. "At some point," Eric continued, his voice steady, "I realized you weren't filling a space or trying to be something you weren't." Sherry watched both of them, silent now. "You just were," Eric said. John exhaled slowly, something in his chest loosening in a way he hadn't known still held tension. "I didn't plan it," he said quietly. Eric nodded. "I know." Another pause. Then Eric smiled, small, genuine. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" John asked, though he already knew. "For being the father you didn't have to be." The sentence settled between them. Clear. Uncomplicated. Complete. John shifted slightly, his usual steadiness holding, but softer now. "You made that part easy," he said. Eric laughed under his breath. "I definitely didn't." "You did," John insisted. "You showed up." Eric blinked once, caught slightly off guard. "That's it?" he said, echoing his earlier question. "That's it," John replied. Sherry wiped at her eyes again, this time not even pretending she wasn't. "That's the whole secret," she murmured. Eric glanced at her, then back at John. Well, he said, I guess I learned from the best. John gave a slight shake of his head, but there was no denying the pride in it now. Don't go getting sentimental on me, he said. Eric grinned. Too late. The crowd around them shifted again, families moving, celebrations continuing, but for a moment, none of it mattered. They stood there, not at the beginning of something new, not at the end of something old, just in the middle of it, where it had always been. And when they finally started walking, together naturally without question, it didn't feel like they were moving on from anything. It felt like they were carrying it forward, the same way they always had, steady, simple, still.